spring 1940. War grips the continent. Germany stands against France and Great Britain. Yet along the Western Front, an uneasy stillness. Armies wait, guns remain silent. No great battles, no decisive movement. A war declared, but not yet fought. The press has given it a name, the phony war. But beneath this quiet surface, forces are gathering and history is already in motion.
This is RetroStory, a passport to the past. Subscribe and join us on the journey. And now, let's dive into history. Paris, September 1939. On the surface, the city still looks the same. The cafés along the Boulevard Saint-Germain are open. The lights shimmer on the wet pavement after an evening rain. And somewhere in the distance, a saxophone drifts out of a smoky jazz club. If you didn't know better, you might think nothing had changed. But history has already turned a corner. Just days ago, Germany crossed the Polish frontier, and in response, France and Britain declared war. War, a word that echoes through every newspaper headline. Yet strangely, here in Paris, the guns are silent. No bombs fall from the sky. No armies march through the boulevards. The city breathes, hesitates, as if the whole of Europe were holding its breath. Later historians will give this strange moment a name, the phony war, a war that exists and yet has not quite begun. But if you walk the streets long enough, if you sit quietly in the corner of the right cafe, you begin to notice something else. The diplomats who whisper too softly, the men who watch the door instead of their wine, the strangers who speak German one moment, Russian the next, and sometimes Japanese. Paris, it seems, has become something more than the city of light. It has become a crossroads, a meeting place for spies. My name is Sterling Blake. Officially, I'm an American journalist covering Europe for a New York paper. Unofficially, I've been asked to keep my eyes open. Very open, because somewhere beyond the laughter of the cafes and the music drifting through the night air, another kind of war is already underway. A war fought not with tanks or artillery, but with secrets. And in September of 1939, Paris may be the most dangerous listening post in the world. Carson was as good as his word. The day after my meeting with him at the Ritz, I received my first invitation, an event scheduled to take place 48 hours later at the Swiss Embassy, 142 Rue de Grenelle. 2 nights later, I found myself beneath chandeliers and polished marble, the kind of place where history dresses for dinner. Diplomats, officers, attachés, and their wives, French, British, American, and a few who preferred not to be categorized too clearly. Laughter flowed easily, champagne even more so. If war existed, it had been politely asked to wait outside. I moved through the room the way Carson had suggested, not asking questions, just listening. That's when I met her, Isabel de la Vega. She introduced herself with effortless poise, her voice carrying just the faintest trace of Madrid. Elegant, composed, and already a little too relaxed for the hour. An American journalist, she said, studying me with quiet amusement. How very fortunate. We spoke of harmless things at first, Paris, music, the strange stillness of a war that had already begun. She laughed easily, too easily, and every now and then, her eyes would drift across the room toward her husband, a man who spoke little and watched everything. It came the way these things often do, not as a secret, but as a suggestion. My husband says the French have built themselves a very beautiful illusion. She paused as if deciding whether to continue. They believe the war will arrive where they expect it. Her fingers traced the rim of her glass. But some of his contacts in Berlin, a faint smile, are quite certain it won't. I said nothing. She leaned closer, just enough. The Ardennes, she whispered. No one is looking there. She straightened again, as if nothing had been said at all, and raised her glass. To surprises. Across the room, her husband was watching us now, not openly, but precisely enough. Enough to understand that this was no longer a conversation. It was a signal, and I had just received it. I left before the evening ended. Paris felt quieter on the way back. Or perhaps I was finally hearing what had always been there. In my room at the Crillon, I locked the door, set the receiver, and waited. Static came first, then her voice. Sterling, darling. Soft, controlled, always exactly where it needed to be. I may have something, I said, and I told her everything. She didn't react at once. When she finally spoke, her tone had changed. That's not rumor, darling. A pause. That's direction. Silence settled between us. Then, you're going to see her again. I hesitated. Careful, she added. Not charming. A softer note followed. Convincing. Another pause. And sterling. Her voice dropped. If that kind of information is being shared at home, she let the thought linger. Then it's already moving. The line had moved again. This wasn't about listening anymore. It was about getting closer. Closer to the truth. Closer to the danger. And in Paris, in the winter of 1939, those two things were becoming one and the same. The winter of 1940 settled over Europe like a held breath. From January into February, and then March, the war remained strangely still. Along the Western Front, armies faced one another, but did not move. In Paris, cafes stayed open. Trains still arrived on time, and yet no one truly believed the silence would last. They called it the phoney war, but there was nothing false about the tension. Behind the lines, men were waiting, plans were being drawn, and somewhere, decisions had already been made. Then came May, and with it, the end of waiting. On the 10th of May, German forces moved, not where they were expected, but through the Ardennes, a forest the French command believed impassable. They were wrong. What followed was not a battle, but a collapse of certainty. The line was broken, the front dissolved, and suddenly the war that had stood still for months began to move faster than anyone could contain it. By the end of May, Allied forces were no longer advancing. They were retreating toward the coast, toward Dunkirk. What happened there would soon become legend. But in those days, it felt like the end. An army pressed against the sea with nowhere left to go. Paris, early June, 1940. The city was still standing, but something inside it had already begun to give way. Dunkirk was over. What remained of an army had crossed the sea. What remained of France was beginning to understand. I met Isabella in a small cafe not far from the Boulevard Saint-Germain, the kind of place where people still ordered coffee, as if routine alone could keep the world from falling apart. She was already there when I arrived, composed, elegant, and carrying the kind of silence that doesn't belong in a peaceful city. She didn't waste time. She told me the truth had already reached certain circles. The army was no longer holding, not retreating, collapsing. I told her we had heard fragments, rumors mostly, nothing official. She gave me a look that made it clear, official no longer mattered. Paris, she said, would fall, not in weeks, in days. Around us, the cafe carried on, voices, glasses, small talk, all of it untouched by what was coming. The censors were still doing their work, buying time. I asked her what that time was for. She answered without hesitation, for surrender. Then she leaned closer, lowered her voice, and told me about a conversation she had overheard. Her husband, and a man from Berlin, a man who claimed to be Swiss, an art dealer. I had met enough of those to know what that meant. According to her, the Germans were not rushing. They didn't need to. Their advance had been too fast, and now they needed time, supplies, ammunition. They were counting on something else to finish the job, the collapse of will. I asked her about the British. She told me Churchill was pressing hard, urging the French to continue the fight, to regroup overseas, North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, to carry the war beyond the fall of France. But as she spoke, it was already clear neither of us believed that would happen. Her husband, she said, had decided to remain in Paris. He believed the city would be managed, a word that sounded far too calm for what was coming. Then, for the first time, her voice changed, softer, almost personal. She told me I should leave, while there was still time. I asked her what she intended to do. She gave me a faint smile, the kind people wear when they already know the answer, and said she no longer knew where she belonged. That was the moment something shifted. This was no longer just information. It had become something else, something far more dangerous. Because outside, Paris was still pretending. But inside that cafe, the war had already arrived, and we were no longer alone.
Paris is glowing in the night, champagne and laughter in the air, golden streets and silver light, no sign of what is waiting there. Whispers hiding in between the words we never say out loud, shadows drifting through the scene, a quiet truth behind the crowd. Oh, Paris, dancing unaware, a melody about to fall. Through passport to the past, we're there, just before it changes all. With Sterling Blake in faded light, and Veronica far away, we follow echoes through the night, at the edge of yesterday. Paris sourit sans voir venir le vent qui change l'horizon. Les nuits s'attardent à retenir les rêves avant la déraison. Passeport dans le temps. Oh, Paris, still shining bright, a dream you couldn't hold for long. The music lingers in the night, Sterling Blake.